and hand it off to our very own Fred Fisher.
Thanks,
Take it away, Fred.
Daniel. Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate everyone taking time. I know for a lot of folks, if you haven't submitted your cost report, it's getting to that midnight oil period of getting things done. So appreciate your time and listening in. Maybe you're having lunch and this is like a podcast. Maybe you're doing other work at the same time. That's all good. We want to be here as a resource and provide education. I had a bird outside my window. You can't hear that though, right, Daniel? Okay. All right. He's just going to talk to me as I'm talking to you today. So that's good. Maybe he'll give me some insight. All right. So what are we talking about? So this year, the interesting thing in this year's rule, might like 10,000 foot view or 30,000 foot view, is there's not a tremendous amount of change in terms of how cost reporting is impacted. There's a few things here and there. There are things in here where we're starting to get a feel of the new administration, and we're going to talk about that in the landscape, just to kind of level set and understand where we are here as we approach 26. What are the feds looking to do? Some of that's crystal ball. We know we have a big, beautiful bill out there. I'm always curious if there's going to be more when it comes to some of the things on the Medicare side, not as much in the Medicaid space. And then, just looking at, okay, with all this lined up, what are the expectations of the new administration of hospitals, and are they going to keep, is this funding real? As we go through, this is all proposed, right? The proposed rule. And so that's another focus of this presentation is, what do we think? Do we think it's going to stick? And we'll look at the past couple of years' proposed rules and, kind of go through what happened between the market basket, wage index, UC dish, all the main things that drive payment. And as many of you know on the call here, our focus for this on the IPPS rule is on the things that drive cost reporting and associated Medicare reimbursement. There are other things. You could go way down in the rabbit hole on all the value-based purchasing stuff. We're not going to do that. We are going to cover those types of things, readmissions, the quality reporting, all that on a higher level. But it is in the same notion of what the administration may be looking to do with some of these programs. So we'll talk about what that may mean. The main things, going back to our focus of cost reporting and reimbursement, what drives payments at your hospitals when the rule comes out is, in fact, the market basket, all the budget neutrality factors. We're going to talk about that. And the two other main drivers are really wage index and the uncompensated care pool. And we're going to spend a lot of time on those areas today. So here's the first thing set up to not scare anybody, but this comes out. This isn't the first time that the Ways and Means has produced their wish list of things that they think they can save the federal spend on. But this is a hyperlink too. So as Daniel mentioned, this presentation will be available on our website and emailed after we're done talking today. But there's a lot of links in here, so make your life easier to click on things and take you to the source. So when you see something in blue, I think that's blue. I mean, it's hyperlinked in many cases. So just to kind of cover this, right? So, I'm looking at this, and I did read the descriptions of the Ways and Means Committee. Like, what are they talking about? You're gonna reduce $230 million of uncompensated care over 10 years. How are you gonna do that? Just to put that one in perspective, there's some comment, well, only hospitals get the uncompensated care pool, and maybe all non-hospital providers should be eligible. Well, I still don't see how that's going to save $230 million, but that's the comment on that one. Site neutrality has been under the radar for quite some time. I know that a couple of years ago, there have been some efforts in draft legislation. So if I were to guess, and I don't like this guess, but that is the one that they're looking in on, and is in their eyes, a quick, easy fix to reduce the federal spend. Medicare bad debt's been on the wish list for a long time. Hopefully nothing happens there. What Medicare will say is, well, we're the only agency that pays for bad debt. That's not true. There are Medicare managed care plans that do pay for bad debt, and I would always suggest that during negotiations with your managed care payers, you see if they'll pay, they'll pay you a portion of that for the coinsurance and deductibles that their beneficiaries do not reimburse. On Medicare bad debt, it's not a part of the rule. I do want to make kind of like a public service announcement. There has been an issue with providers that have been adopting, if you're familiar with Topic 606 and how bad debts should be adjudicated and reflected on financial statements. There's been an update. We probably won't see the change request, but we've been working with Noridian and a number of MACs over the past few years to set the record straight on what they would do if a provider still used a contractual allowance to write off Medicare bad debt. So the update here is you should not be getting any disallowances if in fact that's how your bad debts are being written off. And if you have been disallowed, you should be working with your MAC on a reopening for them to fix that. And so just public service announcement on the Medicare bad debts. We'll talk about the wage index and these reclassifications. When it comes to GME, I don't know if anyone's going to buy that we need to save money in that space. If anything, we need more residents. So it's just interesting to kind of, again, set up the framework for what the administration might be looking at and the reality of, will some of these things actually transpire, or, is this billboard material, and hopefully that's all. So while the feds are saying, we want to take your money away, they'll say, but we'll make your life easier. Maybe you won't have to report as much. So I know AHA put out, I think, 100 things, like a wish list of things that would reduce burdens on hospitals. What they cite, and I love the terminology, unleashing prosperity through deregulation of the Medicare program, such strong words this administration uses. So what they're trying to do is find 10 existing regulations that would make everyone's life easier, right? And they talk about redundancies between what you might report to Medicare and Medicaid, between the conditions of participation and even some of the value-based purchasing programs. These are some of the questions that they ask, and these are just highlights. So when I see this, and when many of you might see this, I mean, we all don't do everything in healthcare, but we do operate in certain spaces. And so the space that we operate in is obviously in the Medicare cost report. So when I see these questions, I think of, okay, well, I got one, let's talk about this exhibit, this charity care exhibit and bad debt exhibit 3B and 3C. Why don't we nix that as soon as possible? If you're going through an S10 audit, you likely are seeing that the MACs prefer to use the old methodology. These new exhibits, and we have confirmation of this, that Medicare, and again, I'm not here to say they're a poor performer, but I don't think they did a great job, or anybody any justice, especially with the charity care and the bad debt exhibits, for a number of reasons. So that would be one I would put in here. Another one might be, what's up with all these IRIS duplicate requests when they have no meaning behind it? Most hospitals are above their FTE caps. Most of the duplicate FTEs when it comes to teaching, meaning one hospital A claims one doctor for a period of time, and hospital B claims that same doctor, and they cross over, right, in that period of time. Some of it has to do with start and stop dates and how payroll works, which is very immaterial. But like I said, in many cases, providers are over their caps and it's meaningless. So why are we spending our time on doing that effort? So that would be another one that you might want to think about if you're going to respond to a request for information. Okay, so now that we've set the landscape, make your life easier and look to take your money away. What are they proposing to do for 26? And again, a little bit of insight into where we're headed. Again, I said this before, focus areas, again, what impacts reimbursement? Are there any, linear comments that providers should be making? And then just thinking about, if you all are doing your budgets, especially, does it make sense to use what's in the proposed rule? Is it going to stick? Comments are due next Tuesday. Be wary. They provide, this is a link. It is hard sometimes to navigate the CMS website to find exactly where those comments go. So good luck through your endeavor if you're submitting comments. Okay, so CMS says there's a $4 billion increase year over year. I calculate 3, but and I say Toyon calculates to 3 billion. What we do though, when we calculate the rates, is I've decided rid of the outlier estimates. They skew everything. Who knows how real that the outlier estimates are from year to year. So we've removed those, and we're up to about a $3.2 billion increase. But what's notable is certainly the $1.5 billion increase in UC dish payments proposed in 26. So will that stick? We'll talk about that. New technology continues. I forget exactly how many there are. There's over 20. So that's a benefit to hospitals. And we always say too, if you're providing those services, there is a look back period to make sure you're coding those correctly and getting credit for that add-on for any new technologies, products or service or products that you're using at your hospitals. And so what's decreasing, and this is every year, the low volume adjustment is supposed to be reverting back to the harder criteria. And the Medicare dependent hospital status is supposed to be going away as well. Now, when we model this out at Toyon, I still include those things because every year they tell us they're going away, and at the last minute there's some enacting legislation that continues these programs, and I hope that continues to be the case. I don't know for sure, but last year there was a law, in fact, HR 10445 that was not enacted, so they did give it a chance last year to further provide these the low volume and the Medicare dependent extensions, and last year didn't work. So we'll see if there's another attempt. So this is again talking about what the first thing I do when the rule comes out, and that's why it takes a minute for us to get our presentation together. They look at all the tables and the numbers because they really tell you everything you need to know, right? You look at all the wage index tables that come out, and the DRG impact file, and the DRG weights, and the UC dish payments. Right? We compile all that and we say, okay, what do we think the estimated payments are? And we aggregate it by state. And so these are the states that have the largest so far percentage changes as you compare 26 proposed to 25 final. With the interim final comment period, the 25 rule was released like 3 times, if you guys remember last year. What's common about these, and not 100% common, but a lot of these are in states where I would presume that the uncompensated care is a little bit higher, maybe because you're not in a Medicare or Medicaid expansion state. Maybe there's just naturally more uninsured people. And so because the pool goes up, if you're in a state, right, that gets a decent amount of uncompensated care, well, now you're going to get more. Interesting thing on that too, if anyone's curious, this year, your uncompensated care cost could have went down to by 20% as compared to last year, and you still would have broke even. That's how much this $1.5 billion increase to the pool means. So that's an interesting statistic. So then we go and we look, okay, here are the states that aren't seeing, these are the top lowest increases. Again, this is all subject to change still due to, we'll see if the UC dish payments change, budget neutrality factors will change, and wage indices for a number of states will change because of the way that the rural floor is now working. But these are states still, when I look here, what's the common thing of these states? Well, not 100%, but in many cases, these are states with less uninsured, right? And so if you have less uninsured and the UC dish pool goes up, you're not going to get as much as a state that has more. So that's one reason, but there are other factors and variables that go into this wage index is certainly enough. Okay, so we talked about what drives payments. And I know there's a decent amount going on here, but what I wanted to show, or what we want to show, is what happens. Like right now, there's 2 things. CMS is saying that the net update to the market basket is 2.4%. But when you compare table 1A through 1E, 26 to 25, right? You just look at the base labor, non-labor payments, and you do a percent differential. You'll never tie to this, or very rarely will you tie to this net update. And this is the number that's often highlighted when CMS comes out with a summary. We're updating the rates by a market basket of 3.2% less the ACA productivity adjustment, so the net update's 2.4%. That's not really true, because what happens is you have budget neutrality. So this year, and we'll see, again, I don't think this is going to stick, but they account for the changes in all the budget neutrality factors. There's a lot of things that we pay for, geographic reclassifications, the 10% cap on the DRG weights. There's a whole, and I have a geeky slide. I'll show it to you. We won't have to get in the weeds. But the takeaway is, number one, that net update that's communicated to providers isn't really the full picture. The full picture is after budget neutrality, right? If you just want to get a percent idea of what your rates are going to do from year over year. And the second part of that is, look how much it changes from proposed to final in 24. And I say this because let's look at 25. In 25, CMS came out and they said, oh, well, we proposed a market basket of 3% and we raised it up to 3.4. That's good news. Oh, okay, great news. Meaning it, and then you take out the ACA and it goes from 2.6 to 2.9. But what's not communicated is the real story. Again, if you look last year, if you compare 25 to 24, your rates only went up by 1.95%. And that's because of these budget neutrality adjustments. So this is the real number. And so it's just something to consider, as we look at the rates. And then the question is, well, what the heck are these budget neutrality adjustments? You don't have to blind yourself on this. But what I wanted to illustrate is which one is the culprit. There's a lot of budget neutrality factor adjustments. And just to describe what CMS does, the first thing they do every year is they take the labor and non-labor rates, but they strip out the budget neutrality adjustments. So what you see up top, like these are the 25 rates here, if there were no budget neutrality adjustments applied to those. And then they take the current year budget neutrality factors and they apply those to the rates. So these are the numbers at the bottom that many of you should be familiar with. When we look and we say, okay, well, why are rates going down from proposed to final? The guy that's doing it is this reclassification budget neutrality factor. So what CMS is saying is that by the time the final rule comes out, there are more reclassifications that hospitals have to pay for, and therefore we have to adjust all the rates downward. And so that's currently what's driving it. And, you could see, like last year, this number was 0.9768 and then finalized 0.9628. This year, it's pretty darn similar, right? 0.97. So is it going to go down? Probably. And therefore, it's hard to really ascertain what that net change is going to be until the final rule comes out. The other thing going on with the rates, if you're in a CBSA with a wage index above 1, the CMS is proposing to change the labor share from 66.7% to 66%. And what they do, and they do this, I don't know if they do it every 3 years, do it every couple years, take all the cost report data and they group all these things from worksheet A and probably S3 part 2 and get an idea of what is the cost of labor-related expenses versus non-labor, and they figure that cost has shifted to 66% labor, down from 67.6. So that's, if you have a wage index above 1, you're going to lose a little bit because you're not getting as much of your wage index applied to your rate. What's an argument against this that hasn't been successful, but it's an interesting argument. When CMS takes all this information from the cost report, if you're in a health system with a home office, well, those costs aren't really all in a wage index CBSA above 1, right? Those costs it could be related to other hospitals perhaps that are in other CBSAs. So there are some tweaks that you can make, but CMS probably will never make them. But these are the kind of arguments that have been presented to CMS in efforts to optimize that labor component. So here's
Fred, if you don't mind, I'll just add that
ahead,
there's a whole section of the rule that talks about this if you really want to geek out on how they come up with this stuff. And it's kind of like Fred was alluding to with regard to, they're looking at all these different labor costs and rebasing them. And yeah, we've commented on the past, but to Fred's point, it's probably going on deaf ears, right? But it's just kind of an interesting, it's an interesting thing noting that CMS is paying attention to these numbers. And I don't know. I think Fred I thought the current year was 67.6. That might be a typo.
Oh, it's typo.
Well,
Ryan, you get a prize.
yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, 67.
that wasn't intentional, folks. That was.
I know. And I'll tell you what, though, that's an announcement. If you catch a typo, we should give out prizes.
There you go.
If you catch a typo. That's a good idea. Thank you, Ryan, for finding that.
That's all I got. I'll see you later.
Okay. All right. So the one of the comments, and again, this is a comment we've made many years, probably falling on deaf ears. However, in the SNF world, they listen. In the SNF world, they actually chew this stuff up. I didn't know that until this year. Pretty much what we're saying is, hey, every year MedPAC comes out with a report and says the market basket is too low, you should increase it. So they have a draft report. These are all links you can go see, where they're saying increase it by at least 1%. The reason I brought up SNF is because they actually have a look back in the SNF world where they look at the actual market basket increase and true it up. We don't true it up in our world, right? And so it can be a dangerous request, right? Because it goes in the wrong direction. You wouldn't want that true up to happen. But, I think in the world that we currently operate in, that costs are certainly pretty darn high. And I would safely guess that they exceed the market basket update. Okay, on the DRG weights, there are 27 that go up by 10% or more, and there are 31 that are held at that floor of 10%. They're in the addendum C, so you can see those. The interesting thing in the rule is that when I calculated, though, the 10%, meaning I look at the weight in 26 proposed versus what the DRG weight was in 25, I get a negative 11.11% floor. So I don't know what's going on. And again, maybe CMS, maybe it's an error on CMS's mistake. Maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't get a 10% floor this year. I got an 11.11%, which I thought was weird. So just letting everybody know that. We're investigating and we'll see what we find out. Here's, and then this is the area it's very important stuff. Going back to, a couple slides earlier, though, where CMS or the White House, in fact, is looking to release burdens on hospitals. As we look at what some of these proposals are, the question is, is any of this stuff redundant or anything here that we don't want to see because I'm already doing this with the state where it provides them the value, et cetera, et cetera. What caught my eye again with this is in the readmissions program, they're adopting 6 Medicare Advantage measures that they'll be looking at. And so I think that was something they were looking to do for a few years. And so they've adopted that to 6 measures. They also highlighted here too this extraordinary circumstances exception. So pretty much what they're saying is, if you're having an issue, something usually outside of management control, or God forbid a bankruptcy or something like that, it sounds like they're more willing to work with you, and they will want to clarify that through their extraordinary circumstances exception, which they talk about throughout the proposed rule. So I've denoted where it's applicable. This is the Fund Interoperability Program. Again, it's like, hey, is this stuff redundant? And I don't do this. So I'm always curious with these measures on this, which affects your markup on the labor and non-labor rates. Are any of these duplicative with value-based purchasing or other programs? It's like, how many measures are we reporting across all these programs? It's an abundance, right? So that's what I see when I see all this stuff. It's like, wow, man, it's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot for a little. And then we have quality program. They're just requesting from comments. Again, this goes back to that RFI about how they could make it a more efficient process. And we talked about this. This is the Medicare dependent and low volume adjustment stuff. So if you are a Medicare dependent hospital, CMS is saying do your best, try to become sole community if you can. Otherwise, unless the legislation is extended or more is enacted, it's back to IPPS for those hospitals. And the low volume adjustment, I mean, you could see the changes there, but really they make it much more hard to achieve and strict, and the payment adjustment is empirical instead of the maximum 25% for 500 discharges. This is a public service announcement. This is not in the rule. This was in last year's rule. And the reason I bring this up, though, is because when you look at the tables that come out with the rule or the CMS files, there's a new one where they say, if we had changed our outlier reconciliation using these cost reports, which they're not yet, these are for cost reports in federal fiscal year 2025. But they say, if we applied this change to our outlier methodology, then they list the hospitals and the estimated impact on those hospitals. So you feel free to check that out if you get to the CMS website. The change is, and this is where math is interesting. So currently, and I'll use like 0.3. If you have a cost charge ratio of 30%, right now, it either has to go, well, I should say previously, before federal year 25, it would have to go down to 20% or up to 40%. That's a 10 percentage point swing. But now they're saying they're going to use 20%, not 20 percentage points, but 20%. So if you start with that same 30% cost charge ratio, well, 20% of 30 gets you to 36, right? And then in the opposite direction, the 24, right? So you want to, it's easier to be flagged for an outlier reconciliation with this change. So as you're doing, so you're doing 630 is going to start soon. I'm trying to think what the first federal year 25 cost report will be. But when you're in that federal year period, so for a 1231, that would be 1/1/25 to 12/31/25. You want to certainly keep your eyeballs out on this change. Another public service announcement on outliers. You see that your cost to charge ratio is going up or down, but probably more up. You can request your MAC to use the new cost to charge ratio sooner than later, right? And you get more of a benefit that way. Okay, Mr. Sater, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Fred. I'll give you a little reprieve, catch your breath. Thanks for all that good stuff. All right, everybody's favorite topic, wage index. Fortunately for 2026, it was relatively quiet in the rule as far as new regulations. So a lot of what we'll talk about here is kind of recapping things that have changed over the course of the last couple of years. We'll kind of highlight, we're still in a little bit of a COVID era, if you will, with regards to the average hourly wages, and we'll see that in another slide. So again, let's just kind of recap where we're at. Quick refresher, if we work from left to right on this slide here. Obviously, wage index is a team sport. You take your CBSA's average hourly wage, divided into the national average. The one thing that Fred was talking before in a few slides about the budget neutrality implications. Wage index is unique in the sense that you have this, as Fred's highlighting there, in a very nice Vanna White-esque effort, the roll floor budget neutrality factor, right? That is specifically applied to your wage index, right? It's not applied to your standard rates. And we know, well, we don't know for sure, but I am 99% certain that the number that we see in the proposed rule, which is 0.9859 or something, right, will go down or up depending on how your perspective of it is, it right? And what that is, and that's important because what that is essentially is that is with the rural floor, right? The rural floor meaning no urban area can be lower than the rural area in your state. And if everybody remembers, back in 24, CMS changed kind of the policy around how that rural floor is calculated. And so we've seen a lot of shift in a lot of places getting the rural floor, in entire states getting rural floors, right? And I think last year was over 60% of the country or something got some form of the rural floor in the country. It's kind of gotten out of control from that perspective. So anyways, what we're seeing as a result of that is this rural floor budget neutrality, which used to be in the 0.99 range, meaning, right, if your wage index was a 1, exactly, and they applied this rural floor budget neutrality, you would go down to 0.993 or whatever it was. Now this is 0.98 in the proposed rule. It was 0.975 last year or thereabouts. I expect this year to be about that about that number, probably, right? So again, using one as example, all of a sudden the rural floor budget neutrality gets applied, and you go from point nine, from one down to 0.98, and then down to 0.97 in the final rule, assuming you're not doing anything else and you're not receiving the rural floor like a lot of these states probably are. So I just throw that out there because, whatever you're seeing in, say, the proposed rule, if you're looking at table two at your number, unless you end up getting some sort of rural floor, you're doing something with that wage index to try to, shuffle around your reclassification or whatever, that number is probably not going to stick. So just pay attention to that. Um, you know, keep working our way over hospitals reclassifications. We don't need to go through that. Nothing's really changed there. CMS still has this, if you recall last year, CMS in the final rule, interim final rule, I think it was, I think they had a couple iterations. CMS got rid of or removed the transitional wage index, or I'm sorry, they removed the bottom quartile wage index, right? So wage index is below 25 percentile. Since 2020, there was a slight bump, and because of some legislation and some litigation, they got rid of that last year. But they are proposing, and it's not material to the grand scheme of things, but if you are in this situation, it does help. There is a transitional wage index increase for those that did lose out on that last year. We still have this policy where your wage index cannot drop more than 5% from the previous year. So that's a nice policy. Nobody's really going to contest to that. That is budget neutral, but it's not, it's not a tremendous hit to your rates if we were to refer back to that slide. And then statewide rural floor is a big deal, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. So those are kind of the wage index policy landscape. Again, nothing changing from 2024, really, when they made that big change to the rural floor calculation, other than the removal of that bottom quartile. Okay, so we always like to kind of show the national trends, right? I mean, and I spoke of this just a second ago about the COVID wages. So if you look where we've got kind of the circle there, between 24 and 25, or I should say in 25, we saw a 9.2% increase in the national average hourly wage, which is absurd, right? That's a substantial increase. Historically, we run in the 2.5% to 3%. 24, we saw 5.5%, which was a big jump. Now we've kind of leveled off to 5.2%. But a big part of that, from what we've observed, is COVID. And, we remember, it's about that time frame, 2021 cost reports, where a lot of places were losing staff to retirements. People were trying to have stay bonuses, and just kind of to retain people, we had to pay more. On top of that, we had contract labor, right? As I'm sure the whole industry knows, people were dealing with a significant amount of contract labor, and a lot of that flowed through the wage index in 2021, and it still sits there in 22. And what's kind of unique, my observations when I look at kind of nationally, this contract labor in a big market, like I'm just going to use New York City or something as an example. Contract labor, yes, it could be significant, and it's going to drive up labor in that market, but it's only going to move it so far because you got so many salaries in one CBSA. Whereas in smaller markets, a lot of contract labor is going to move the needle a lot more, right? So we saw places like in the Midwest going up 10, 15, 20%, right, in terms of the average hourly wage. Whereas like a New York City, Los Angeles, some of these big markets, yeah, maybe they move 4 or 5%, which is, notably higher than it normally would be, but it doesn't keep pace with the 9.2%, right? So bottom line is, if you're not keeping pace with these national increases, your wage index is going down, right? And so just kind of an observation that we've noticed, and I presume this will level set a little bit, or level itself out over the course of the next couple of years as we kind of wean out of the COVID wages. But just an interesting observation, to see how we've, really spiked up in the last couple of years. So, go to the next slide, Fred. Okay, so speaking of the rural floor, which, as I mentioned earlier, is become kind of it's the majority of hospitals are receiving some sort of rural floor. And what we've got in the appendix, I think we've got a number of slides too that you can pay attention to and kind of just track some stats. But we wanted to highlight a couple things. Notably, if you look at, say, columns, basically you see the increase. If we go all the way to the left here, in the proposed 2023, we had 640 hospitals that were receiving their state's rural floor in the proposed rule. jumped up to 766, right? Okay. And that's because there is what I'll call optimization strategies that are done in various states, and the opportunities were there in 23. They just weren't as prevalent as they are now because of the change in the rule in 24. So fast forward to 24, we go from about 1,200 to 1,500. 25 rolls around. Now we go from 1,300, so pretty close to 24 proposed, all the way to 1,850. What does that mean? Well, that means folks are paying attention to sort of optimization, right? Because of the rule change, there's an opportunity for states to kind of, again, I'm going to keep using the word optimize your state's rural floor. And that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to wage index strategy these days. So you can see the huge spike. 26 proposed, we're already up a little bit at 1,500. I bet that number will be close to 2,000, right? And how many PPS hospitals in the country? 3, little over 3. I mean, that's a huge number of hospitals receiving some form of the rural floor, and my comment on that is like, hey, is that the way the wage index system is meant to be? Absolutely not. I mean, the system is the system is in need of reform. But, our messaging is, hey, you got to try and, optimize and take advantage of what you can while you can, because, it needs to be addressed. Certainly that's not the intent of the system, but it's the system we have in place, right? So, oh, there you go. Down
Hey,
the
Ryan.
3259.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Go ahead, man. No, and everything you just said, Ryan, for those that are interested, CMS says the same thing in the federal year 2024 final rule when they made this change from 23 to 24. They say things like, we expect many states where all hospitals get the rural floor, we expect hospitals to be strategic, and they pretty much acquiesce because, the reason why the policy changed from 24 is because CMS kept losing in court. And they acquiesced. They said, okay, we're going to do it your way, but this is what's going to happen. And so that there is that discussion. It's not as if CMS is unaware of what's going on here.
Exactly. And it's a budget neutral environment. So to them, it's no cost, right? The cost for them was dealing with the litigation that they were dealing with, right? So to Fred's point, they just kind of put their hands up and said, what, forget it. You guys figure it out, and actually a note, and we're not going to call out specific states because we're not calling anybody out, but I did notice when you were pulling up the top 10 and bottom 10, Fred, in the previous slide, Colorado, on there, I just happened to glance, it's an all rural floor state, right? Everybody's receiving some form of the rural floor in the proposed rule, right? Now, all that's going to be subject to change when the final rule drops. But I just kind of noticed, and as folks know, wage index moves the needle. It's 60, well, now 66% of your payments if you're above 1. So here's this rural floor budget neutrality factor. Again, I'd already kind of prefaced some of these numbers, but going back on the left here, before they changed the rule about how they were calculating the rural floor, 0.99 was kind of where we lived now. And then 24 rolls around, we go from 0.98 to 0.97. And then coincidentally this year, the proposed is the exact same, or it's off just slightly, but it's pretty rounding. It's the same. So again, I suspect when the final rule drops, it'll be around this 0.97, if not even a little lower. So, and that again goes back to that's just kind of the name of the game right now. And, as Fred said, CMS acknowledges this, right? They say, hey, we know this is happening. But it's just, we had to do what we had to do to kind of get out of some of this litigation that we were dealing with. So.
And Ryan, just to re-highlight what you said, and going back to the first slide, Fred, this administration is looking for savings, right? And wage index is budget neutral. So there's no savings there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting too, like on that first slide in the ways and means, they talk about geographic integrity of wage index, dual reclassifications. And I question, like, what are they talking about? I mean, this is budget neutral. Like, what are you going to save in this environment? So I know with the dual reclasses, you get a benefit. For some of you folks know you get an IME pickup by being quote unquote rural, but I can't imagine they would try and take that away from hospitals because, we know there's physician shortages. We know that's an underperforming, it's not the right word, but an under reimbursed sort of mechanism. So I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting to see what the administration does with this. And also it's not, a lot of folks might be like, well, the blue states are taking advantage of it. Not really. This isn't this really isn't a political deal. I mean, this is red states take advantage, blue states, if you want to put it that way. So, again, I don't suspect the system we have in place right now is going away anytime soon, but we're going to hear more chatter about it going forward for sure. So.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I appreciate your point, Daniel and Ryan, on the budget neutrality aspect of this. Absolutely, the wage index is budget neutral. You know, Ryan, the IME is probably pretty big dollars. You know, if you go back, that hospitals started to really take advantage of this opportunity. I want to say in 2017. The rule is you have to be rural for 10 years in order to keep that IME bump, and I'm sure that all adds up. But I couldn't imagine, I could imagine. I just think it would be really mean for CMS if they wanted to take that back, right? Especially if the hospital's starting new programs. And then on the other side of that, again, this is all going back to the Ways and Means wish list of reconciliation items. You have hospitals that qualify for 340B with rural status, and that could be some big dollars for savings. But ultimately, absolutely, when it comes to the wage index, it's budget neutral, and there are no savings. And I don't know if that was considered when the Ways and Means Committee were tallying up their 10-year estimates.
All right, so some important dates for 26. We've already passed one date here, the one on the left, May 27th. This was earlier this week regarding, you have 45 days from the proposed rule to withdraw or terminate your reclassifications. So that's gone by. The next sort of deadlines are, June 2nd, I think, isn't on here, but in the coming weeks, we've got, if you're canceling rural designations or your rural, you have to do that 120 days prior to the federal fiscal year. This lock-in date, I'll just kind of mention this because it relates to the rural floor. It's kind of interesting. That is 60 days after the proposed rule is released publicly, right? Not in the Federal Register, but on their website. You have to be considered rural to be part of your corresponding state's rural wage index, right? And CMS has kind of been, they've gotten more transparent, but I think they've gotten more savvy when it comes to this because of what we just talked about, right? Because of the optimization and state strategy and so forth. You got to be on top of this stuff if you're in a state where you're trying to optimize the rural floor, because they're cracking down on making sure that you're following the timelines accordingly, right? I'm sure some of you folks, if you're involved in your reclassifications, the MGCRB, which controls these, they came out with their decisions for 26 in like early December, which is well over a month sooner than they've ever done it, right? And I think that caught a lot of people off guard, myself included. So if you weren't doing everything you're supposed to on a very timely basis, you were going to miss these quote unquote deadlines. So it's just kind of interesting to see CMS is sort of, they're pretty savvy. I think they know what they're doing. So anyhow, September 2nd. So we're kind of fast forwarding coincidentally, the federal year 27 wage index timetable was just released. Following same timelines, right? What we call the initial public use file just came out. They've just published September 2nd as your deadline to do revisions to your average hourly wages for 27, which is your 23, 24 cost reports. And so that's kind of the next wave of things to do, so to speak, when it comes to wage index. So.
Awesome. Right. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, man.
And that's it. That's all right. Wage index. Thanks, Fred.
We're making good time. We're at 10:45. I could do the rest in about 15 minutes. And I don't know, Daniel, if we have questions. If not, that's okay. All right. So DSH and uncompensated care. This is what we talked about, right? 26 is proposed at $7.2 billion. It's like the highest it's been over the past 4 to 5 years, which would be nice for hospitals. It's a 25% increase over last year. But will it stick? So let's take a look at what some of the trends are. First of all, this is, when we look at this, this is a trend of 23 through proposed 26. This orange section is how much is being reimbursed. This blue, I think, section is the remaining amount of uncompensated care costs that are not reimbursed for DSH hospitals. So again, it's like, thank you CMS and everyone, all the decision makers for more money, but we've got a lot more that we could use, please. And at the same time, I always say when I look at this slide that, if you are negotiating, going back to negotiating with a Medicare managed care plan, absolutely ask them to pay a per diem rate, whatever your uncompensated care per diem rate is, because it's not double dipping. It would be double dipping if you were overpaid, but there's still a lot that's not being paid for. And so that's the logic there, again, going into your negotiations with Medicare managed care, and hopefully having some success in getting them to pay a UC dish payment. So why is the pool up this year? Well, there's two things, factor one and factor two. And I'm going to illustrate on a more detailed slide, like the numbers and where they're changing and what they mean. But conceptually, what is factor one? So factor one is taking something that's current value. So this year, it's taking 2022 cost report data. What CMS does is they say, if there was no such thing as the ACA, how much would we be spending on empirical dish? Meaning your dish factor is not 25% of your dish factor is 100% of your dish factor. How much would that be? But not just for 2022. We start with the base year 2022, but for those of you who had the fun in taking finance class in college, you have to bring it up to a present value, right? Like the present value or future value. Yeah, I guess it's future value. So you're taking something that's old and you're marking it up to a future value. So they're looking at what the market basket is, the estimation of discharges, case mix index. They have the infamous other bucket, which we all love. The reason why, and I'm going to show you, but the reason why factor one is better this year is because some of the COVID years are finally out of that true up, right? Because we're starting with 22, we go to 23, 24, 25, 26, true up. Prior years, we were starting with 2020 or 2019, bad data, right? And then not only is the data bad, and by bad, I mean not a high utilization, right? COVID data. And when you're using that data, what are you going to project 21 and 22 to be, right? Lower, right? It takes a minute for CMS to realize, or any actuary to realize, when are things going to kind of pick up again? And so this year in 26, things are picking up with that factor one. That, I think, should stick. It's the factor two that has been fluctuating from proposed to final over the past couple of years. I'm going to show you that. Factor two, though, is how much has the uninsured rate changed since the ACA? So pre-ACA, the national uninsured rate was 14%. Post-ACA, they estimate it every year. And so right now, they're estimating that in 26, we're going to have more uninsured than we did in 25, proposed. But they did that last year. Last year, they estimated they'd have more than 24, but then when the final rule came out, tanked. What they're using is National Association of Healthcare Expenditures. I've read as much as I could in it without my head exploding, because it's all, how actuarially they look at things. But I'm optimistic that it should stick, because there's a lot of things that are happening. And I'm always interested in feedback. When we hear and see patients, beneficiaries falling off of Medicaid enrollment, that is a direct correlation with factor two, right? The uninsured rate goes up. So the bill that's in front of Senate now, right? That would have huge consequences to the number of Medicaid patients, and eventually uninsured would go up. Eventually, though, is the key. Would it be in 26? Daniel and I were talking about this yesterday. It seems to us, though, that with the big, beautiful bill, a lot of those changes might be more out in the 27. Doesn't mean that 26 shouldn't stick, though. So this is the geeky slide. You don't have to look at every column. I'll show you just some things I find interesting. One, remember I said the first thing that CMS does is they start out with their estimate of empirical dish payments as if there was no ACA. So if we rewind time to 2023, which they used cost reports from, I think, 2019. They estimated that there would be $13.8 billion in empirical dish payments. We fast forward to 2026, that number actually went down to $13 billion. Why? Why would that go down? I speculate, and hopefully I'm right, when we have people migrating out of fee-for-service to managed care, That has an unintended consequence of what goes on in this dish pool. CMS is not going to account for the managed care beneficiaries in their estimate of empirical dish payments. And so that, in my opinion, is why the starting point of the pool is not as high as it used to be. However, like I said, this is that factor one adjustment. So if you go back, rewind time, you see we weren't getting a markup in factor one because of that COVID data. It was bad, didn't help us. This year, a lot of that data is gone, or the projection of what the outlook is better in terms of the number of discharges of CMI, in terms of better for hospitals than a number of people. So that's why we're starting with $13 billion and marked up by 4% or 5%. That's an additional $2.6 billion that's being added to the pool that you could see in prior years. Look at, they were taking away money at one point from that markup. So that's the first reason why the UC dish pool is up. And here's the rest of the math, right? But that's what's going on. Here is factor two. And remember, so again, what we're trying to illustrate is, will it stick? Well, in 2023, it did. But in 2024, it did not. 2024, they said that this factor was going to be 66%. And this is a goofy calculation. This is not the percent of uninsured. This is the change pre and post ACA is what it reflects. So the higher number, the better when it comes to the UC dish pool. So this 66% in 24 dropped. So we lost $700 million. Last year, it dropped and we lost $800 million. So this year, it's pretty close to what it was proposed at last year. And so again, fingers crossed it doesn't drop. What I did in preparation for this meeting was I kind of read about what data they were using. And this is where, again, I know some things, I don't know all things. They use the same data set in 26 as they did in 25, just in terms of the base year data, but they probably updated some of their actuarial projections. But it's the same fundamental data as what drove this 54% that they used last year. So I find that interesting. So fingers crossed, guys. If you're doing your budget, I've talked with folks that say, well, I want to believe it, but I don't. So maybe use a 3-year average. Maybe use last year's payment. You just be careful when you're budgeting about this UC dish payment.
But Fred, just safe to say though, I mean, 7.1 billion. I mean, okay, let's just say they take away $500 million or something, right? Now we're at 6 points. I mean, we're still up, right? I mean, that
still up. Still up. That's because of this factor one. Good point, Ryan. Yeah. And what this also represents to everybody is like, you get paid about 25% on the uncompensated care cost dollar. So if you look at line 30 of worksheet S10, it's about 25% of that. It's a 3-year average, but you get what I'm saying. There's a 25% payment rate, which last year was at 17%. Okay, so same idea when it comes to comments on UC Dish. Remember that the factor one is a markup, a true up from base year to present value. So they're using the market basket. MedPAC says the market basket should be higher. So CMS should incorporate that not only in the market basket, but in the UC dish pool portion where they update the market basket. This is just a reminder, the UC cost that they're using is a 3-year average. This year, it's cost reports that fall within federal year 2020 to 2022. That also means that 2023 is the next year under audit, which we're all experiencing, I believe, right now. And, again, to the point of, I stood on my soapbox earlier when it comes to how these audits are going down. And it's not pointing fingers at the MAC or anybody. It's just that these exhibits, I think, took a turn for the worst when it comes to productivity and what's going on that side. The thing to always remember is because it's a 3-year average, though, let's say you're doing a 23 audit and you have the finding and you go, oh, I found more. I didn't know I had this self-pay transaction or whatever. And let's say you get it through on your 23 audit, you can still go back and open up previous cost reports that are used in the 3-year average, right? But that's more of a reopening or amended cost report process, but the MAC and CMS will work with you if you have that discovery. You have until June 10th. At this point, if you have a mistake in your UC dish data, you can request them to fix it, but it has to be like a mishandling mistake. It can't be like, hey, you know, we're still arguing that we think that this amount should be allowable. That's not what they're asking. They're saying, you know, is there a fat finger typo that inadvertently went into your number? Okay, so transitioning to DISH Classic, empirical DISH. This is not really a part of the rule, but again, there's a lot going on in the DISH space, in particular with the DISH withhold being released. And so you guys are probably getting NPRs like every day. And, you know, it's a lot. And so with this slide, you know, I just wanted to kind of cover all the different things that are going on. The reason why the NPRs are coming out is because of 1498 R3, right? Which pretty much, you know, we're at a point where we'll keep fighting as long as we can take it. But where those Part C days are part of the SSI ratio, not the Medicaid ratio. There's some other litigation going on, though, when it comes to the SSI. There was a recent decision in Advocate where the provider did not prevail, unfortunately. You know, a lot of these SSI appeals have to do with just the black box. What data are you using, CMS, when you come up with my SSI ratio? It can be related to aid codes. It could be related to just why is there a patient in my SSI data with a length of stay of 8,000 days, right? That makes no sense. Things like that. So people are challenging that. This Advocate did not come out successful, but we know our friends at Pomona continue their battle. We always root for them. And we're all suspicious of that SSI ratio. Okay, so the final thing when we talk about DISH is MedPAC does propose that the whole DISH theme change. What MedPAC is saying is, hey, you're measuring DISH, empirical DISH anyway, on the indigent Medicaid population in large part. We think you should measure DISH on the indigent Medicare population. And so they proposed a methodology that uses this Medicare Part D as a proxy to identify indigent Medicare, but they still have to use uncompensated care required by law. And again, they want to pinpoint the Medicare population, so they look at the Medicare share of total days. They say if we do this, they'll add $4 billion to the payments. We'll see. You know, that's what MedPAC would suggest. You know, when it comes to this kind of thing, though, and I think as you all know, you need providers to relatively be on the same page. If not, if we don't have consensus, these are hard things to move along. And you know, this would be a major change. Okay, GME. Not too much in the GME. These are the available FTEs. If anybody's in these markets of Hawaii and Massachusetts, you could put your applications in. Coming up though by the 10th, if you want to make a play for these FTEs here, these closed hospitals. There's a bunch of language in here that if you have a sub cost report or not a cost report that's 365 days or 364, sometimes it changes, that they're proposing a methodology on how to treat those short periods when you're counting your FTEs. So I suggest that if you're in that situation and you're a teaching provider, this would be something to review in the rule this year. Allied health, I mean, I read it, I was like, is this important? I don't know. But there's some instruction on removing revenue from the program to claim the net expense. And it has to be, you know, they do talk about if you need to make a B-1 allocation change on how your stats work, they would like to see a letter from the hospital before any changes are made. So that's on the next slide. This is not in the rule, but another public service announcement. We are seeing a more prolific approach by the MACs to disallow allied health programs, particularly when you are a health system and if you're running things like payroll through the home office, that's on their radar. So just a public service announcement, there's probably a number of you here on the call that might be going through that situation. We'll be at the PRRB next week or the week after, and with hopefully prevailing argument, so wish us luck. Okay, so the team model, for those of you who were selected in CVSAs, I'm not, you know, just high level overview, it's 30-day cost of care, right? It's the the feds are saying, look, we, from a 30-day period, just like the bundled payment program for knees and hips, or CJR, we want to monitor how much are we spending across different markets over a 30-day period, regardless of where the patient is, right? Hospital and post-acute care. And so it has a lot of collaboration involved to meet certain benchmarks and targets. There's thousands and thousands of pages on how the program works, but conceptually, that's what they're looking at, right? The government wants to reduce their spend, they want to see increased efficiencies, and so they roll out these alternative payment models. These are the, again, this is from last year. I'm not going to go through too much of this, but these are the 5 things that they're looking at for the team model. There's year 1 is only upside. If you're a safety net, the whole program is upside, but if you're not a safety net, there is a downside risk starting in year 2, I believe. Here are the DRGs. Again, we keep this in here as a resource for you all if you need it. So here's what they are changing. So they're moving. Oh, Heather Rose, you're going to ask me a question on Teams. Go ahead, Heather. Hey. Okay. Well, Daniel, if you want to connect with Heather, sometimes you have to be careful too. If you inadvertently do this with your hand, I think that it can make the wave happen on your screen too.
Go ahead, Heather.
So maybe we need to unmute her. Daniel, would you? Oh, there you are, Heather. Are you there?
I am. I'm so sorry. I was not trying to ask a question. I have no idea how that happened. I'm sorry to interrupt.
What's going on? It's okay.
But it's good to see you.
Oh, okay, good. So no questions. So just the hand came up.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I have no idea how that happened.
No worries. No worries. Nice to talk to you, Heather. Okay. I say, if it's a Teams question, I better watch out. So they are changing these different areas. I read about this community deprivation index versus area deprivation index. It's essentially the same thing. The community is just more meticulous on how they work with the data, was my takeaway. And they are proposing some value-based purchase or quality measures for hospitals selected in the team model, which is a little bit ironic given the fact that they want to reduce the reporting burdens on providers. There's continuing Medicare dependent hospitals if you are one as a safety net. So even if that status goes away, you're still protected as a safety net hospital in this program. And then they have some other risk adjustments that I'm not going to get into that they proposed this year. And that's it. So what I'm going to do is just do a Vanna White preview of the addendum so that you guys can see what we have. So this is, these are the rates in the addendum, right? So if you're curious, I mean, you all probably have these built already. But what we are showing is what is the actual percent variance from the prior year, going back to very early discussion of the impact of budget neutrality, et cetera. So this the full update. Then you have hospitals that get a 0% update if you're not a meaningful health EHR user. You get a reduced update with no quality data. And if you do neither, you get a negative, almost a 1% decrease there. Here are some other major things that that affect reimbursement. It's interesting. The fixed law, the outlier threshold went down. That's CMS's attempt every year. They're trying to outliers by statute have to be 5.1% of the total spend of Medicare. So every year that's kind of like a target that they're looking at. So this year it actually went down. Here we have outpatient should be coming out in July, I think. So the most we have right now when we flip over to the outpatient side is just what was in the final rule for 25. Again, the story is kind of the same though. When we look at the net update, we still account for these budget neutrality. Budget neutrality is a little bit harder to calculate on the outpatient side. We look at the conversion factors to figure that out. These are the other rules that are proposed right now. Psych, rehab, SNF, hospice, all about, it's interesting. The market basket's different for everybody, right? Different data sets, different costs of providing the care. SNF, though, I just learned this, has this. No other provider type gets a forecast error adjustment. So this is them truing up to what the market basket actually was. Probably for last year, they true it up this year. So that's interesting. Again, a little dangerous to do that, but if you're a gambling person, I think it would be favorable. These are the DRG weights that went up 10%. I'm not going to go through them all, but you could see them if they're interesting to you. And if your hospitals provide these services, you certainly should know these things. These are the DRGs that are supposed to be held harmless at 10%, but remember I said I got 11.11. I don't know. I did it like 3 different times to make sure I was right. And I know that CMS released this table like 5 times last year. So I think I'm using the most recent, but in any case, right now I have it at 11%. And I can't explain. As Ryan mentioned during his presentation, we have some other addendums here that focus on, if you're curious about more when it comes to all the changes in the wage index from 23, where we're at now. This shows you how many hospitals have redesignated as rural. So, I mean, back in 23, we were around 600. Now we're at over 800. Well, with this 412.103 status. These are the dual reclasses, meaning these are the hospitals that are redesignated as rural and have a geographic reclassification with the Medicare Geographic Classification Review Board. And you can see that this has been on the uptick as well. These are just hospitals with reclasses. Again, I was curious about this because this is that factor that is constantly driving things downward when it comes to the budget neutrality that hits the labor and non-labor rate.
Well, and to your
then,
point on that, Fred, just back to that for a quick sec.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Right? You see the trend between proposed and final goes down, right? Because generally you reclass and then you look and say, hey, it's not beneficial, so I'm going to withdraw. So you no longer have that reclass in play. But yet that factor that you had pointed to much earlier in this conversation goes down, right? Meaning the budget neutrality is greater. So it does make you wonder a little bit. So
funny. Smells funny to me.
A little bit. We're going to be doing some investigating here because we're geeks like that and have nothing better to do, right? So wish us
luck. Yeah. All right, and then thank you. And now I get to show our beautiful faces, Brian. So we did it a little bit over an hour. Daniel, any questions, homie, from the group?
No questions from our attendees. Great job, Fred. And just want to let everybody know, we also have projections, IPPS impact projections for your health system. If you're curious, feel free to reach out. We can get that over to you. Also showing your UC DSH trends, those year over year. So more tailored kind of impact analysis. There's also a cool little single provider calculator where we keep a lot of the prior year rates, constant discharges, the CMI. You can kind of tweak that and change that as you like to kind of do some simulations. So feel free to reach out and we'll provide that.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll drop everybody. Have a great rest of your week. We appreciate working with you all. And like Daniel said, and we said throughout, we're here as a resource. So reach out anytime. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.